The fever had burned through Samuel Jenkins for 6 days straight, and on the 7th morning, he opened his eyes expecting to see the pearly gates, but found instead a woman with dark hair and determined eyes pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. He tried to speak, but his throat felt like sandpaper rubbed raw. The woman noticed his struggle and brought a tin cup to his lips, supporting his head with surprising strength as water trickled down his parched throat. Samuel coughed, and the movement sent fire through his chest and limbs. "Easy now," she said, her voice low and steady. "You have been dancing with death for nearly a week. Do not rush back to the living world too quickly." Samuel's vision swam as he tried to focus on her face. She appeared to be in her middle 20s, with olive skin and eyes the color of rich earth. Her simple cotton dress was rolled up at the sleeves, and dark circles shadowed her eyes as if she had not slept properly in days. "Where?" he managed to croak. "Porterville, California. My home, specifically. I found you collapsed near Chile Creek 3 days past sunset. You were burning up with fever and talking nonsense about cattle rustlers in Colorado." She dipped the cloth in a basin of water and wrung it out. "I am Zara Osborne, and you are fortunate I ride out to check my water rights regularly, or the coyotes would have made a meal of you." Samuel closed his eyes, trying to piece together his fractured memories. He had been driving cattle north from Los Angeles, headed toward the San Joaquin Valley. It was spring of 1878, and he had been hired by a rancher to move a small herd to new grazing land. But somewhere along the trail he had started feeling poorly. Then the fever had come on fierce and fast, and everything after that was a blur of heat and confusion. "My horse," he asked, "tied up in my barn. A fine Appaloosa mare. She stayed near you, which is how I knew you were a decent sort." Animals know character better than most people. Zara set the cloth aside and ladled soup from a pot hanging over the fire. "You need to eat. Your body has been fighting hard and you have burned through every ounce of strength you possessed." She helped him sit up, propping pillows behind his back. The room spun briefly, then settled. Samuel found himself in a small but tidy cabin with whitewashed walls and simple furnishings. Sunlight streamed through gingham curtains, and he could hear chickens clucking outside. The soup was thin broth with vegetables and shredded meat, but it tasted like the finest meal Samuel had ever eaten. He managed half the bowl before exhaustion pulled at him again. "You should rest more," Zara said, taking the bowl. "The fever broke last night, but you are still weak as a newborn calf." "I need to get back on the trail," Samuel protested, though even forming the words exhausted him. "The cattle will be someone else's concern now." Zara's tone was firm. "You nearly died. Another day without help and you would have. Whatever job you were doing is finished. Right now, your only work is healing." Samuel wanted to argue, but sleep dragged him down before he could form another sentence. When he woke again, the light had changed to late afternoon gold. Zara sat near the window, mending a shirt with quick, efficient stitches. She had changed into a fresh dress, and her long, dark hair was braided down her back. "How long have I been here?" Samuel asked. Zara looked up, and a small smile touched her lips. "Awake again. Good. This is your 4th day under my roof. The first 3 you were more gone than present. You have been caring for me all that time. I live alone. There was no one else to do it." She set aside her mending and came to check his forehead. Her hand was cool and gentle. "The fever is truly gone now. You will live, Samuel Jenkins. How do you know my name?" "I went through your saddlebags looking for information about who you were. I found letters addressed to you and a contract for cattle driving. I hope you will forgive the intrusion, but I needed to know if you had family I should contact." Samuel shook his head. "No family left. My parents died of influenza 5 years back, and my brother went east to try his luck in Chicago. Have not heard from him in 2 years." Something flickered in Zara's eyes, gone too quickly for Samuel to name. "Then we are alike in that regard. I have no family either. This land was my father's, but he passed last autumn. My mother died bringing me into this world, and I was an only child. You run this place alone." "I do what needs doing. I have 30 acres here, a good well, and water rights to the creek. I run a small vegetable garden, keep chickens, and have 3 milk cows. It is not a grand ranch, but it keeps me fed and provides a little income when I sell eggs and vegetables in town." She moved to the stove and poured herself coffee from a battered pot. "Would you like some? Or is your stomach still too unsettled? I would take coffee if you are offering." She brought him a cup, and Samuel sipped the strong, bitter brew gratefully. He studied Zara over the rim of his cup. She moved with the efficient grace of someone accustomed to hard work, and there was a straightforward quality to her manner that he found refreshing. Most women he knew in California either simpered and played coy, or they were hardened saloon girls with calculating eyes. Zara seemed to be neither. "Why did you help me?" he asked. "You did not know me. I could have been an outlaw or worse." Zara settled back into her chair, cradling her own coffee cup. "I told you already. Your horse stayed with you. That told me something. And besides, I could not very well leave a dying man to the elements." "What kind of person would that make me?" "A practical one. Plenty of folks would have passed right by." "Then I am glad I am not plenty of folks." She met his eyes directly, and Samuel felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with his recent illness. "We are all just trying to survive out here. Seems to me that helping each other is the only way any of us make it through." Over the next 3 days, Samuel's strength returned slowly but steadily. Zara fed him hearty meals and changed his bandages where he had scraped himself up in his fevered collapse. She was a skilled nurse, her touches efficient but gentle, and she seemed to know exactly which herbs to brew into teas that eased his lingering aches. As Samuel grew stronger, he insisted on helping with chores despite Zara's protests. At first, he could only manage small tasks like shelling peas or folding clean laundry. But soon he was able to walk outside and help feed the chickens, collect eggs, and haul water from the well. Porterville was a small town in the southern San Joaquin Valley, and Zara's property sat a few miles outside the main settlement. The land was flat and fertile, with the Chile River providing water and the Sierra Nevada mountains visible in the distant east on clear days. It was beautiful country, and Samuel found himself noticing details he normally would have ridden past without a second glance. Working alongside, Zara felt natural in a way that surprised him. She did not chatter needlessly, but when they did talk, the conversation flowed easily. She asked him about his life as a cowboy, and he told her about sleeping under the stars and the freedom of the trail. In turn, she spoke about her father and how he had taught her everything about working the land. "He wanted a son," Zara admitted one evening as they sat on her small porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "But he got me instead, and he decided I would simply have to learn to do everything a son would have done. So he taught me to shoot, to ride, to fix fences, to read the weather. My father was not a warm man, but he was fair, and he made certain I could take care of myself." "He did well," Samuel said. "You saved my life with those skills." Zara glanced at him, and in the fading light her eyes held warmth. "I suppose I did, though nursing and cooking were things I had to teach myself from books after he died. He never bothered with such matters while he lived. We ate simply and poorly." Samuel chuckled. "Well, whatever you learned from those books, it worked. Your cooking is fine. You were half-starved and fevered. You would have thought boot leather tasted fine. No, I mean it. You are a good cook, Zara." She looked away, but he caught the small smile on her lips. "Thank you." Silence settled between them, comfortable and easy. Samuel realized with some surprise that he was in no hurry to leave. He should be looking for new work, finding another cattle drive or ranch that needed an extra hand. Instead, he found himself inventing reasons to stay another day, then another. It was Zara who finally brought up what they had both been avoiding. "You are well enough to ride now," she said one morning as they worked together in her vegetable garden, pulling weeds between rows of beans and squash. "Your fever has been gone for 5 days and you have your full strength back." Samuel sat back on his heels, dirt under his fingernails and sweat on his brow. "I know." "So what will you do?" He looked at her, really looked at her. Zara knelt in the garden dirt, her dark braid falling over one shoulder, her dress simple and practical. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with fancy clothes or painted faces. She was real and capable and brave, and somewhere in the last week, Samuel had started imagining what it might be like to stay here, to build a life in this place. "What if I did not go?" he asked quietly. Zara's hands stilled in the dirt. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if I stayed? You said yourself this place is too much for one person. You need help and I need—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I have been drifting for 5 years, Zara, going from job to job, town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. But being here with you, it feels different. It feels like maybe I could stop running." "You do not know me," Zara said, but her voice was soft, not dismissive. "We have spent barely more than a week together. I know you saved my life when you could have left me to die. I know you work harder than most men I have met. I know you are kind but not soft, and you face the world with courage even though you are out here alone. That is more than I have known about most people I have spent years alongside." Zara was quiet for a long moment, her gaze searching his face. "Why would you want to give up your freedom? You said yourself you love the trail, sleeping under the stars, the open country." "I did love it," Samuel agreed. "But maybe what I was really loving was not having to stay in one place and risk caring about something. Risk losing something the way I lost my parents and my brother. Out on the trail, nothing touches you deep enough to hurt. And now I think maybe that is not living at all. That is just existing." Zara's eyes shimmered and she looked away quickly, focusing on the weeds she was pulling. "I will not lie to you, Samuel. I could use help here. It is hard doing everything alone, and there are tasks I struggle with because I simply do not have the strength or the height. But I will not have you stay out of pity or obligation. If you remain here, it has to be because you want to, not because you feel you owe me a debt." Samuel reached out and gently took her hand, stilling her nervous pulling at the weeds. Her fingers were rough with calluses, warm and strong in his grip. "It is not pity or debt. I am staying because when I think about riding away from here, about never seeing you again, something in me rebels against it. I am staying because I want to know what might grow between us if we give it a chance." Zara's breath caught, and she finally met his eyes again. "You could break my heart, Samuel Jenkins. You could break mine just as easily, Zara Osborne, but I think maybe that risk is what makes it worth something." She smiled then, genuinely smiled, and it transformed her whole face. "Then stay. Stay and help me with this place. Stay and let us see what happens." Samuel squeezed her hand gently and then released it, returning to the weeding with a lightness in his chest he had not felt in years. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt right to Samuel in a way nothing had for a very long time. He repaired the sagging fence around Zara's property, fixed the leaking roof on the barn, and helped her plant additional rows of vegetables that they could sell at the market. In return, she fed him well and laughed at his stories about misadventures on cattle drives. They were careful around each other at first, both aware of the newness and fragility of what was building between them. But slowly, that careful distance began to close. Samuel's hand would linger on Zara's back when he helped her lift something heavy. Zara would touch his arm when making a point during conversation. They sat closer together on the porch in the evenings, until their shoulders brushed companionably. It was Samuel who finally gathered the courage to speak what had been growing obvious to both of them. They had gone into Porterville to sell vegetables at the weekly market, and the trip home found them riding side by side as the sun set in a spectacular display of gold and crimson. "People in town are starting to talk," Samuel said. Zara glanced at him. "I know. Mrs. Henderson at the general store asked me today who the handsome cowboy was who had been helping me. She wanted to know if you were my cousin. What did you tell her?" "I told her you were a friend who was helping me run the farm." Zara's mouth quirked. She did not look like she believed me. Samuel was quiet for a moment, then pulled his horse to a stop. Zara stopped beside him, looking at him questioningly. "I do not want to be your friend," Samuel said. Hurt flashed across Zara's face, and she started to turn her horse away, but Samuel reached out and caught her reins. "Wait, that came out wrong." He took a breath. "What I mean is, I do not want to be just your friend. These past weeks with you have been the happiest I can remember. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing on my mind before I sleep. When you smile at me, I feel like I could move mountains. I am falling in love with you, Zara, and I needed you to know that." Zara's eyes widened, and for a heartbeat, Samuel feared he had spoken too soon, pushed too hard. But then she swung down from her horse and walked to where he sat. He dismounted quickly, and they stood facing each other in the dusty road. "I was afraid to hope," Zara said softly. "I told myself you would get restless and leave, that I was foolish to let myself care. But I could not help it, Samuel. You made me laugh again. You made this place feel less lonely. You made me remember what it is like to have someone to share things with, and I have been falling in love with you too." Samuel cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "Then can I court you properly, the way you deserve?" "I think we have been courting already in our own way," Zara said with a soft laugh. "But yes, Samuel, you can court me properly." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Zara's arms came around his neck. The kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, a claiming and a promise all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "We should get home," Zara said, her voice slightly unsteady, "before it gets full dark." "We should," Samuel agreed, but neither of them moved for another long moment, content just to stand there in the fading light, holding each other. The courtship that followed was both traditional and unconventional. Samuel slept in the barn, maintaining propriety even though they both knew how they felt. But during the days, they were together constantly, working side by side and stealing moments of affection when they could. Samuel brought Zara wildflowers from the fields. Zara made his favorite meals and mended his clothes with careful stitches. In July, Samuel rode into town and spent half his saved wages on a simple gold ring. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, he got down on one knee. "Zara Osborne, I came to you dying and you gave me back my life. But more than that, you gave me a reason to want to live it. I do not have much to offer you except hard work and a heart that is completely yours. Will you marry me?" Zara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "You have more to offer than you know, Samuel Jenkins. Yes, I will marry you. Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him up to kiss him thoroughly. They held each other as the California night settled around them, warm and full of promise. They were married in August in the small church in Porterville. Zara wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, with wildflowers woven into her hair. Samuel wore his best clothes, cleaned and pressed, his hair neatly trimmed. The preacher performed the ceremony before a small gathering of neighbors and townspeople who had come to know the young couple through market days and Sunday services. When Samuel kissed his bride, sealing their vows, he felt something settle deep in his soul. He belonged here. He belonged with her. The wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless and smiling in the darkness. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed that was now theirs, listening to the night sounds through the open window. "I never thought I would have this," Zara whispered, her head on Samuel's chest. "A husband who loves me, a true partner." Samuel stroked her hair, marveling at the softness of it unbound. "I never let myself want it. I thought staying alone was safer. I was wrong. We were both wrong. But we found each other anyway. Because you refused to let me die in that creek bed." Zara laughed softly. "Well, I could not very well let a perfectly good cowboy go to waste, could I?" Samuel chuckled and pulled her closer. "I love you, Mrs. Jenkins. I love you too." The years that followed were full of the hard work that defined life in the San Joaquin Valley, but they were also full of joy. Samuel expanded Zara's vegetable operation, and together they built a reputation for producing the finest produce in the county. They added more chickens, bought additional cows, and eventually acquired a pair of pigs. Samuel proved to be as good at farming as he had been at cattle driving, approaching each task with the same steady competence that had made him a reliable ranch hand. But more importantly, he proved to be a devoted husband. He never forgot to tell Zara he loved her. He never took for granted the life they were building together. Zara bloomed under the security of their partnership. She smiled more easily now, laughed more often. The lines of worry that had marked her face when Samuel first met her gradually eased. Together, they made improvements to the property, adding a new room to the cabin and building a proper chicken coop. In the spring of 1880, Zara told Samuel she was pregnant. He whooped with joy and spun her around the kitchen until she was dizzy and laughing. That evening, sitting on their porch as the sun set, Samuel placed his hand on her still, flat belly. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Zara asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it. Terrified too, if I am honest. What do I know about being a father? What did either of us know about any of this when we started?" Zara covered his hand with hers. "We will learn together the way we have learned everything else." Samuel leaned over and kissed her gently. "You are right, and our child will have the best mother in California, and the best father," Zara replied firmly. Their son was born in late November during a cold snap that left frost on the ground. The labor was long and hard, and Samuel paced outside the bedroom door while the midwife from town attended to Zara. When he finally heard the baby's cry, strong and indignant, he burst through the door to find Zara exhausted but smiling, a tiny bundle in her arms. "We have a son," she said. "Come meet him, Samuel." Samuel approached the bed on trembling legs and looked down at the red, wrinkled face of his child. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving tiny fists in protest at the world he had just entered. "He is perfect," Samuel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas James Jenkins, after both their fathers. Little Thomas proved to be a healthy, hungry baby with a strong set of lungs. Samuel discovered that fatherhood suited him in ways he had never anticipated. He loved watching his son grow and change, loved the weight of the baby in his arms, loved seeing Zara nurse their child with such tender devotion. The farm prospered as Thomas grew. In 1882, they were able to purchase an additional 20 acres adjacent to their property. Samuel hired a young man from town to help with the heaviest work, freeing up time for him to spend with his family. Zara discovered she was pregnant again in the summer of 1883, and their daughter was born the following spring. They named her Grace Marie Jenkins. Where Thomas had been a fussy baby, Grace was placid and content. She watched the world with serious dark eyes and rarely cried. "Two babies," Samuel said one evening as he held Grace while Zara helped Thomas with his supper. The boy was 3 now, sturdy and curious about everything. "How did we get so lucky?" "Hard work and good fortune," Zara replied, wiping Thomas's face as he protested that he was not messy. "And love, plenty of love. The children grew, and so did the farm." By 1886, the Jenkins property was one of the most productive in the area. Samuel had built a larger barn, expanded the house twice, and they now employed 2 steady hands year-round. Thomas, at age 6, followed his father everywhere, eager to learn and help. Grace, at 3, preferred staying near her mother but showed early signs of her father's steady temperament. One evening in late summer, Samuel and Zara sat on their porch watching Thomas and Grace chase fireflies in the yard. The children's laughter rang out in the warm air, and Zara leaned against Samuel's shoulder contentedly. "You ever miss it?" Zara asked. "The trail, the freedom of the cowboy life?" Samuel considered the question seriously, then shook his head. "No, not even a little. That life was about running from things. This life is about running toward them, toward you, toward our children, toward everything we are building here. I have more freedom now than I ever had on the trail because I chose this. I choose it every day." Zara turned her face up to him, and he kissed her softly. "I am glad." "Are you happy, Zara? Truly happy, more than I ever imagined I could be? When I found you dying by that creek, I thought I was just doing the decent thing. I had no idea I was finding my whole future." She smiled at him, her eyes warm in the fading light. "You are my best decision, Samuel Jenkins. And you are mine, Zara Jenkins. You are mine." In 1888, another son joined their family. They named him William Paul Jenkins, and he arrived squalling into the world with the same fierce determination his father had shown in surviving that terrible fever 10 years earlier. Thomas, now 8, took his role as big brother seriously. Grace, at 5, was delighted to have a baby in the house again. The years continued their steady march forward. Thomas grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's steady nature and his mother's determination. Grace proved to be book smart and eager to learn, and Zara taught her to read from the few precious books they owned. William was the wild one, always getting into mischief and keeping everyone on their toes. By 1892, Samuel was 40 years old, his dark hair now streaked with silver at the temples. Zara, at 38, had a few strands of white in her dark braid, and laugh lines crinkled around her eyes. The hard years had left their marks, but so had the good ones. One evening that spring, after the children were asleep, Samuel and Zara walked out to look at the land they had built together. The moon was full, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. In the distance, they could see the dark shapes of their expanded barn, the neat fences Samuel had built and rebuilt over the years, the fields that would soon be green with growing crops. 14 years, Samuel said quietly. 14 years since you found me dying and decided to save my life. Best decision I ever made, Zara said, taking his hand. I was thinking the same thing earlier, about how finding you, being found by you, was the moment everything changed for me. Samuel pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind so they both faced their land, their home. I was so lost, Zara. I did not even realize how lost I was until you gave me a reason to be found. Zara leaned back against him, solid and warm and real. We saved each other, I think. I was drowning in loneliness out here, even if I would not admit it to myself. You gave me partnership and love and a family. You gave me everything. They stood there in the moonlight, two people who had found each other through chance and fever and determination. Behind them, the house held their sleeping children, the future they had created together. Before them stretched the land they had worked and nurtured, evidence of their shared labor and love. "What do you think happens next?" Samuel asked. "We have children growing up, a farm that runs well. What is the next chapter for us?" Zara turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. "I think we keep doing what we have been doing. We love each other. We raise our children to be good people. We work this land and take care of it so it will take care of us. We grow old together, Samuel." That is what happens next. Growing old with you sounds like the finest adventure I could imagine, even better than the cowboy life, Zara teased gently. "Better than anything," Samuel said firmly and kissed her to prove it. The kiss was long and sweet, flavored with the familiarity of years together but still holding that spark that had first drawn them to each other. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "Come on," Zara said, taking his hand. "Let us go home." They walked back to the house together, hand in hand, their footsteps synchronized from years of walking side by side. The moon watched over them, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the night. Inside the house, Samuel banked the fire while Zara checked on the children. Thomas slept sprawled across his bed, one arm hanging off the side. Grace was curled up like a kitten, her favorite doll clutched in her arms. William, the baby at 4 years old, was tangled in his blankets, his face peaceful in sleep. Zara stood in the doorway between the children's rooms and the bedroom she shared with Samuel, and her heart swelled with gratitude and love. How different her life had turned out from what she had imagined during those lonely years after her father's death. She had resigned herself to a solitary existence, had convinced herself that independence was enough. But independence was not the same as wholeness, and Samuel had made her whole. Their children had made her whole. This life, this beautiful, difficult, rewarding life, had made her whole. Samuel came up behind her, resting his chin on top of her head. "What are you thinking about? How grateful I am, how lucky we are. We make our own luck, I think. We work hard and we love hard and we build something worth having." He kissed the top of her head. "But yes, I am grateful too. Every single day." They went to bed in the room they had shared for 14 years, in the bed where their children had been conceived, and where they had comforted each other through sorrows and celebrated joys. The sheets were clean and cool, and the night breeze through the window carried the scent of growing things. As Zara settled against Samuel's side, her head on his shoulder in the position that had become natural as breathing over the years, she thought about that day by the creek. She had been checking the water levels, worried about irrigation for her crops, thinking about all the work that needed doing. And then she had seen the horse standing near the water, and the man collapsed on the ground, and everything had changed. She could have ridden past. The thought had crossed her mind briefly. She had been alone, and this stranger could have been dangerous. But something had made her stop, had made her dismount and check on him. Maybe it was the way his horse had stayed nearby, loyal despite its thirst and fear. Maybe it was simply that she could not ride past someone in need. Whatever the reason, she had made the choice to help, and that choice had given her everything she now held dear. "Samuel," she whispered into the darkness. "Mm." He was nearly asleep, his breathing deep and even. "I love you." His arms tightened around her. "I love you too. Always have, always will." Zara smiled and let her eyes drift closed. Outside, the California night sang with crickets and distant frogs. The moon tracked across the sky. And in the small farmhouse outside Porterville, two people who had saved each other slept peacefully, surrounded by the life they had built from fevered dreams and determination. The years continued their steady progression. Thomas grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over much of the farm work from Samuel. At 20, he married a girl from town, a sweet-natured young woman named Elizabeth, and they built a small house on the far corner of the Jenkins property. Grace, true to her early promise, became a teacher in the Porterville school, making her parents proud with her education and dedication. William, the wild one, surprised everyone by developing a talent for horses, and at 18, he was already known throughout the county as someone who could gentle even the most difficult animals. Samuel and Zara aged gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. Samuel's hair went fully silver, and his hands developed the arthritis common to men who had worked hard their whole lives. Zara's dark hair became streaked with white, and she moved a bit more slowly in the mornings. But their eyes still lit up when they looked at each other, and they still held hands when they walked together. In 1900, Thomas and Elizabeth gave Samuel and Zara their first grandchild, a girl they named Sarah. Samuel held his granddaughter with tears streaming down his weathered face. "A grandfather," he said wonderingly. "I am a grandfather." Zara, holding his arm and smiling down at the baby, said, "You are going to spoil her terribly." "That is what grandfathers are for," Samuel replied and kissed the baby's soft head gently. As the new century dawned, Samuel and Zara found themselves in the position of family elders. Their children were grown and making their own ways in the world. Their farm, which had started as Zara's small 30 acres, now sprawled across nearly 100 acres of productive land. They employed several families and were known throughout the San Joaquin Valley as fair employers and skilled farmers. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1898, Samuel had commissioned a photograph of them both. They stood together, Zara seated and Samuel standing behind her with his hand on her shoulder, both dressed in their finest clothes. When Samuel saw the finished photograph, he was struck by how much their faces showed the journey they had traveled together. The hardships and the joys, the losses and the victories, all were written in the lines around their eyes and mouths. But what showed most clearly was the love. It was there in the way Zara leaned slightly toward Samuel, in the way his hand rested protectively on her shoulder, in the slight smiles on both their faces. They looked like what they were, two people who had chosen each other and never regretted that choice. Now, in the spring of 1903, Samuel was 51 and Zara 49. They had been married 25 years and together for even longer. Their children were all grown and launched into their own lives. Thomas and Elizabeth now had 3 children, and Grace had recently announced her engagement to a lawyer from Fresno. William was courting a rancher's daughter from up north. One evening, Samuel suggested they take a ride out to the place where Zara had found him all those years ago. It was something they had not done in years, both of them too busy with the demands of farm and family. They saddled horses, Samuel on the aging Appaloosa mare that had stayed with him through his fever, and Zara on a gentle gelding. The ride to Chile Creek took less than an hour, and they arrived just as the sun was beginning to set. The creek looked much as it had 25 years earlier, though the cottonwood trees along the banks had grown larger. Samuel dismounted and helped Zara down, and they stood together looking at the place that had changed both their lives. "Right there," Zara said, pointing to a spot near the water. "You were collapsed right there, and your horse was standing about 10 feet away, looking miserable." Samuel slipped his arm around her waist. "And you stopped to help a dying stranger. Best decision I ever made." They had said those words to each other countless times over the years, but they never lost their meaning. Samuel turned Zara to face him, cupping her face in his weathered hands the same way he had done when he first kissed her all those years ago. "I was dead in all the ways that mattered before I met you," he said seriously. "I was just going through motions, drifting from place to place with no purpose. You did not just save my life that day, Zara. You gave me a life worth living. You gave me love and family and purpose. You gave me everything." Tears shimmered in Zara's eyes. "We gave each other everything, Samuel. I was so alone before you came. I had convinced myself I was fine with it, but I was not fine. I was just surviving, same as you. Together, we learned how to truly live." They kissed there by the creek, as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. The kiss was tender and deep, flavored with 25 years of love and partnership and shared struggle. When they pulled apart, both were smiling through their tears. "25 more years?" Samuel asked. "At least," Zara replied. "Probably more. We are both too stubborn to go anywhere anytime soon." Samuel laughed, and the sound echoed across the water. "That is the truth. We are the most stubborn people I know." They stayed by the creek until full dark, talking about memories and dreams, about their children and grandchildren, about all the years behind them and all the years they hoped still lay ahead. When they finally rode home, it was with hearts full of gratitude and contentment. The farm lights were visible long before they reached the property, and Samuel felt the familiar warmth that came with seeing home after being away. This land, this place, had become as much a part of him as his own bones. He could not imagine being anywhere else. That night, lying in bed with Zara curled against his side, Samuel thought about the fever that had nearly killed him in the spring of 1878. At the time, it had seemed like the worst luck possible, getting sick on a cattle drive with no help nearby. But that fever had brought him to Zara. It had brought him to this life. Maybe there was no such thing as luck, good or bad. Maybe there was just the universe arranging things in ways that made no sense until you looked back and saw the pattern. Samuel had been brought low by fever so that Zara could find him. Zara had been riding out to check her water rights so she could save a dying cowboy. Two lonely people had found each other through a combination of illness and compassion and chance. And from that unlikely beginning, they had built something beautiful. They had built a family, a farm, a life rich with love and purpose. They had grown old together, exactly as Zara had predicted all those years ago when they stood in the moonlight and talked about their future. "What are you thinking about?" Zara murmured sleepily. "I can feel you thinking." Samuel kissed the top of her head. "Just about how grateful I am, how lucky we are." "We have had this conversation before, I think," Zara said with a soft laugh. "And we will have it again," Samuel replied. "Many more times if I have my way." "You usually do," Zara teased, but there was love in her voice. "Only because you let me." True enough. They drifted toward sleep together, comfortable and content. Outside, the California night wrapped around their home like a blessing. In the barn, the animals settled for the night. Across the property, in the small house Thomas and Elizabeth had built, their grandchildren slept peacefully. Everything Samuel and Zara had worked for, everything they had built and nurtured and protected, surrounded them. Their legacy was not just in the land they had tended or the crops they had grown. Their legacy was in the family they had created, in the love they had shared, in the example they had set for their children about what a true partnership looked like. Samuel Jenkins had ridden into the San Joaquin Valley in the spring of 1878 as a dying man with no ties and no purpose beyond the next cattle drive. He had been found by a woman who refused to let a stranger die on her land. And from that act of compassion, everything else had flowed. 25 years of marriage, 3 children raised to adulthood, a farm that had grown from 30 acres to 100, grandchildren to spoil and teach, a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. As Samuel finally surrendered to sleep, his last thought was simple and clear. He would do it all again. Every hardship, every challenge, every difficult moment. He would do it all again for the privilege of waking up next to Zara Osborne Jenkins for the rest of his days. And in the morning, he did wake up next to her, just as he had for 25 years. The sun rose over the Sierra Nevada, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The roosters crowed, and the farm came to life with the sounds of animals and work and family. Samuel and Zara rose together, dressed, and went out to greet the day. There were chores to be done, grandchildren to visit, a life to be lived. They did it all side by side, just as they had since the day Zara had refused to let a fever take a stranger's life. The cowboy who had been dying found his life again in the arms of the woman who saved him. And together, they built something that would outlast them both. A love story written in dirt and sweat and devotion, a testament to what 2 people could create when they chose each other above all else. Years later, long after Samuel and Zara had both passed peacefully into the next world, their grandchildren would tell stories about them. About how grandmother Zara had found grandfather Samuel dying by a creek and nursed him back to health. About how they fell in love and built a farm that sustained their family for generations. About how they loved each other so completely that everyone who knew them wanted to find a love like theirs. The stories would be told and retold, embellished and simplified, but the core truth would remain. 2 people had found each other through chance and fever and compassion, and they had chosen to build a life together, a life full of love and hard work and unwavering devotion. That was the legacy of Samuel and Zara Jenkins. Not just the land they had worked or the children they had raised, but the example they had set. Love was worth the risk. Partnership was worth the effort. And sometimes, the worst moment of your life could lead to the very best thing that ever happened to you. All you had to do was be brave enough to help a stranger by a creek, and courageous enough to let that stranger into your heart.